I used to think awakening had to feel dramatic, like something breaking. But for me, it's been quieter than that, more like noticing. Noticing how I move through my space, how light changes a room, how my body feels before I reach for my phone. I've realized the way I begin my morning shapes how I perceive everything else. When I'm in my body, I feel more precise, more aware, less pulled in every direction. Movement reminds me that strength doesn't have to be loud. Be controlled, intentional, quiet. And maybe that's what this season has been for me, a quieter kind of strength. I used to move through things quickly, through days, through conversations, through feelings. And I think speed can look like productivity, but sometimes it's just avoidance. This year I've been more interested in staying with discomfort, staying with questions, staying with my body. I'm writing about numbness at the moment, about how we slowly stop feeling things when we're exposed to too much. And I realized I had to notice where I'd become numb too. For me, numbness didn't look dramatic. It looked like distraction, scrolling, reacting, moving too fast. Embodiment feels like the opposite of that. It feels like precision, like choosing where my attention goes, like inhabiting my own life instead of observing it.
I've been thinking a lot about how repeated exposure to violence online changes the way we feel. It's actually what I'm writing about at the moment. So I'm interested in why we feel so much when we first see it happening, and then we start to slowly feel numb and like accustomed to it. So yeah, I am using Instagram as a social media platform that kind of disseminates all of this information, and in some instances, like for example in the case of Palestine, it created a lot of political movement, whereas in other cases such as Congo and Sudan, they are less politically mobilized in public discourse. So yeah, I'm really excited about that. And the other day, so I've been reading, so through uni I have access to these books, but I was getting a little bit frustrated because, I just want to underline and annotate in the margins. So I bought the books, but I have read parts of this. So one is Life Grievable by Judith Butler, and it is just, it is amazing. It is like the theoretical basis of everything I want to write about, because what I want to write about has obviously been discussed before. But yeah, so let me read the back. In this urgent response to violence, racism, and increasingly aggressive methods of coercion, Judith Butler explores the media's portrayal of armed conflict, a process integral to how the West persecutes. I want to say that with an American accent. Persecutes. But I can't say it in my own accent. I don't know why. It's wars. In doing so, she calls for a reconceptualization of the left, one united in opposition and resistance to the illegitimate and arbitrary effects of interventionist military action. Yeah, it's super interesting. So I'm excited to pick up from where I left off with this. And then I actually haven't read any segments of this. So this one is Distant Suffering, Morality, Media and Politics by Luke Boltanski, Polish, I assume. So Distant Suffering examines the moral and political implications for a spectator of the distant suffering of others as presented through the media. What are the morally acceptable responses to the sight of suffering on television, for example, when the viewer cannot act directly to affect the circumstances in which the suffering takes place? Luke Boltanski argues that spectators can actively involve themselves and others by talking about what they have seen and how they were affected by it. Developing the idea of the spectator in Adam Smith's moral theory, he examines 3 rhetorical topics available for the expression of the spectator's response to suffering and which have existed since pity became central to politics at the end of the 18th century: the topic of denunciation, the topic of sentiment, and the aesthetic topic. The book concludes with the discussion of a crisis of pity in relation to modern forms of humanitarianism and suggests a possible way out of this crisis, which involves an emphasis and focus on present suffering, which I think is really interesting because this is kind of like the intersection that I'm focusing on. It's like, at what degree does this witnessing of violence mobilize into actually something politically coherent in ways that we can actually create change? And also I'm kind of like defining, so for instance, I'm going to use my own personal example. Last year I was living in my own bubble. I study human geography for my master's, but I was very much like disassociating from the reality in which I knew. And like, I'm very aware of, I study it, I'm very aware of the structures that are in place in terms of like capitalism and the patriarchy and the oppression of people in the global south. And I was aware of Palestine and I was aware of everything like that. But I had this moment where I clicked on a video that was from the Congo, and I had what I would, as I am describing in my thesis, an affective rupture. So I saw on my phone a video of decapitated women in the Congo, and I had never seen something so horrific in my life. And I experienced for the first time shock. Like, you know, we say, oh, I'm so shocked by this, but like, we don't actually experience shock. Shock is a mortifying, genuinely mortifying feeling. And all of the systems that are in place just kind of suddenly clicked in my mind. And I just really understood that to live in the global north, we are given so many privileges, but it is disguised and hidden as like progress and innovation. But it's like we rely on like child labor, like enslavement, like just brutal violence. Like, a lot of these people in the Congo die so that we can access, well, loot, essentially, like just neo-colonialism, so that we can loot their resources to create more innovative technologies. So our lives come at the expense of other people's lives, and that just really hit me. And I started to have a panic attack. For months, I was like, I was angry. I was infuriated. I hated going to university. I hated going to work. I was just having these really blunt reactions to people. I'm like, how are we going about our day-to-day lives when this is happening? Like, how can we sit here and act normal? Like the best way I could explain it was kind of like the Hunger Games, like how they're all in the capital, just like having fun, enjoying, talking, watching all these people like dying on their screen. But like, for them, it was the instance of entertainment, sure, but like for us, it's the instance of us to live lives with all this technology and all these resources, and to wear gold and, you know, all of these things. But it comes at the expense of other people's lives, because especially Africa is one of the most rich, like resource rich places on earth, particularly the Congo. So yeah, it just really, I was really struggling to I had nowhere to put my anger and my frustration at the systems in place. thankfully I had friends to talk to who had similar, like, I guess, awakenings or like awareness, or had this similar experience of like an effective rupture. And I feel like that's what happened to a lot of people when Palestine became very circulated on social media in October 2023. So a lot of people became all of a sudden exposed to this violence, like happening in real time, and something just broke within them. Not broke, but this facade, this illusion of society and the way we function, it all kind of clicked and went into perspective of like the broader picture, and the ways in which I also want to discuss in my thesis, that we are socially conditioned and primed to become detached from this suffering. And also it is fundamentally not only that we're primed and conditioned for it so that it enables the systems to keep going and there's no, uprising, and, how, like, this is against, this is against humanity. Like we are all people, we all feel pain. Like, our empathy becomes limited and skewed in the way that we're taught and that we grow up. But as people, as humans, we have this shared humanity, and we aren't in touch with that anymore. It's something that's become very distant to us. So yeah, these are all the things I'm exploring in my thesis. But yeah, thanks for listening to me rant.
The more I write about numbness, the more I realize it isn't dramatic. It's subtle, and so is attention. Attention isn't something we have. It's something we practice. And I think movement is where I learned that. I don't think numbness is the absence of feeling. I think it's misdirected attention. And maybe awakening is just learning where to place it. The more I pay attention to my body, the more clearly I see everything else. And clarity feels quiet.